Sometimes life is messy. Have you ever wished you could refocus your mind, home, relationships, and work life? Join us as we use research-based information to make practical changes and simplify life. This is Life Simplified.
Welcome to Life Simplified. This is Tiffany, and I am your host today and the entire month of May, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so if you've listened for the last couple of weeks, you will know that we're talking about all things mental health. And we're utilizing Mental Health America's resources. They're really good about promoting Mental Health Awareness Month, and they have lots of really good resources, activities, and worksheets. So I encourage all of our listeners to go check those out, because there's a lot more that you can see and do on your own outside of listening to this podcast. But today we're going to talk about a topic that is a little bit difficult, so hold tight. But our theme today is, how can I set boundaries with my family? We know how important boundaries are, and if you've been listening to Life Simplified very long, you know that we talk about boundaries. We encourage boundary setting, and we've done episodes on boundaries before. But this one is more specific to how I can set those boundaries with my family, because sometimes that may be the most difficult people for us to not only set our boundaries with, but to stick to those boundaries once we've set them. So this article is from Mental Health America, and it's so well done that I will be reading the majority of it to you. So know that this is theirs. This is their information. It's solid, and I want us to be able to talk about our thoughts on these things. So ladies, I've looked through this and I have some thoughts, but I think you will too. So I'm just going to take it piece by piece, and we'll break it down and just kind of see what we think about it, how we feel about it. So I'm just going to start at the beginning. And it just says, you know, when we're growing up, sometimes we grow up around unhealthy behaviors. And it's normal for us to believe that that's just how families are, and that we're just destined to continue forward on that same path. But there are two important steps that are pointed out in this article for processing our emotions around our family and helping us to make better choices for our own mental wellness. So the first one is that we have to be able to notice and label dysfunctional behavior. So sometimes we just have to be aware of it, like just knowing that it's there, being able to label it for what it is a huge step. And so if you didn't get the opportunity to listen to last week's podcast, I encourage you to go back and listen to that, because we talk about toxic behaviors and characteristics and really break it down for what it is. And it may help you to better recognize dysfunctional behavior in your relationships. So that's important. And then the second thing that's really important is that we recognize the stress, the anxiety, or other symptoms that those behaviors are causing us. So how does the dysfunctional behavior of these other people then cause us to have stress, anxiety, and other mental health symptoms? And it goes on to say it's common for these traits to repeat themselves throughout generations, because after all, we learn a lot from our families of origin, and whether we want to continue on certain behaviors or not, subconsciously, they just kind of become a part of us if we don't have that awareness and we don't constantly strive to kind of pivot. So it can repeat through generations. More than likely, our parents picked up on cues from their parents, and their parents picked up from their parents. And it could be things that have been going on for a number of generations and just kind of a cycle that's been stuck. But the article and I encourage you not to despair, because we can break the cycle. That is the great thing about, once we are aware of some not so great behaviors, we have the opportunity to begin to pivot and do different for ourselves and for our kids and the generations that follow afterwards. So we don't have to stay stuck in that generational cycle. The most powerful tool for this is just awareness, self-examination, and willingness to do something different. And so that's what we're going to really talk about today. The first part we talk about here is remember that your needs are your own. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Remember, your needs are your own. So, I'm going to read this part of the article and then we're going to discuss because this one I think is very valuable. So it says family members sometimes do not see their own dysfunction and the burden that it causes others. They find it easier to accept toxic behavior in order to keep the family peace. So I want to kind of pause there for a second. Sometimes we find ourselves accepting toxic behavior just to keep the peace. And I would venture to guess that everyone has experienced that at some level and at some point in their family, where there is someone who's exhibiting a certain behavior that probably most everyone knows is not the best, is not the healthiest, but we just don't want to rock the boat, so to speak. So we let it slide. And I caution you that the more we do that, the more that we just keep the family peace, so to speak, we're actually creating more chaos and more storm behind the scenes and underneath the surface. So just because we may not see the hurricane, it doesn't mean something's not bubbling beneath the surface. And I think that's kind of where we go with that. So an example they give that I think is really solid so we can kind of wrap our head around what this looks like is, let's say a sibling might try to guilt you into visiting your aging parents, even if those parents were abusive to you. Your sibling may have also been abused, but views visiting as a duty, even if it causes them stress, anxiety, and emotional pain. You, on the other hand, might push against this. You know, white knuckling a family gathering helps nobody, and you see it's not worth enduring the emotional pain. Remember, you're not wrong and resist the guilt. Different people have different value systems and ideas of family expectations. It is not your responsibility to live up to someone else's ideals, especially when those ideals cause you direct emotional distress. Okay, this is where I want to pause. I think it's really important to understand that when we're in a family dynamic, especially like with siblings and parents, families of origin, even though we have grown up in the same home, we may have had a very different experience and our relationships may look vastly different. And so it's really important that we stay in tune to our needs, our emotions, our gut, our physical and emotional responses to certain relationships, certain expectations, certain things, and that we don't push our needs on someone else in the family or allow them to push their needs and expectations on to us. What kind of thoughts do you all have about that? Because that's deep. There's a lot there.
Well, and I think it can be especially hard if you have people pleasing
Mm-hmm.
tendencies. And if your personality is you just want everybody to get along and everything to be sunshine and roses, which we know that that is not the case all the time. And the example that was provided there, that was an intense
Yeah.
example. And I think there can be a whole realm of possibilities of what this looks like. And I have found myself telling my youngest because she feels very deeply. She is definitely a feeler. And I've told her before that, you know, her feelings are her feelings. And then other people, they have to deal with their feelings. Like it's not her responsibility to take those feelings on herself. You don't have to fix their feelings, I guess is what
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to say.
And I think that's part of that, like that idea of family peace or peace at any price. And I think there's twofold there. There's one, like we some people feel that they have a responsibility for someone else's feelings or emotions. And if me saying no to this event or this activity, or not wanting to do something because I know it doesn't feel right for me, or it doesn't feel right for my family, but I need to do it anyways because I don't want them to be sad. I don't want them to be lonely or depressed or anxious. And so I allow myself to experience unhealthy emotions and in an event or a thing that wasn't best for me, to try and keep them in a better place. And my needs are my own and their needs are their own, and I'm not responsible for someone else's emotions and getting their needs met. I am responsible if I'm hateful or ugly or rude or any of those toxic behaviors that we talked about in the last episode, but it is not my job to plan my life and make my choices based on someone else's emotions. And I also think this fear of people being upset is that we fear conflict sometimes, depending on your conflict management style. You may be more avoidant, you may be more like, let's just like make it go away, let's don't talk about it. And so for people that feel that way, it can be easier to just be like, oh, it'll be just easier for me to show up, or it'll just be easier for me to just give in and do the thing or not do the thing that I feel like is right, because then I just don't have to deal with it. I don't have to deal with their strong emotions. I don't have to deal with backlash. I don't have to deal with other people's guilt or shame that they project onto me. And so that's why it's so very important that we remember that our needs are our own, because if I don't remember that, I will never be able to set a healthy boundary. And I think it's very valuable to point out that boundaries are not mean. And I think we have a really hard time with that. Boundaries aren't mean. They're not manipulative. They're not hurtful. A true boundary is, this is what I need to protect me and to protect the people that I'm responsible for. So if you're a parent and you have children that are minors that you are responsible for them, then you also set boundaries around them. Now, it's not my job to set boundaries around other adults. That's their job. But for me and for the people I'm responsible for that don't have those choices yet, that aren't there yet, then it is just me saying, I'm going to protect me. And it's not me being mean, and it's not me being ugly, and it's not me being selfish. It's me recognizing what I need to be healthy and asking for those things in a very clear fashion.
Kind of look at it, and like when you were talking about all that, like I guess kind of the end of it would be like just giving yourself permission to do those things.
Yes.
Because it sounds easy, like, oh, I'll do that. But then, like you said, you're going to revisit the, do I want to deal with the backlash? Do I want to deal with that? Because someone who's tried to set more boundaries, personally, it is hard at first and it is a lot to work through. But once you can kind of establish them, and then whomever you're setting those boundaries with starts to realize you're setting those boundaries, it gets a little bit easier. And I don't think they take it as personal as maybe they did at first, but just giving yourself permission to set the boundaries, to, be able to allow yourself personally to be not feel that burden anymore. And
Yeah.
that's hard. And I think it takes work and it takes time, and I'm sure there's probably some tips you can give us on, like, just finally like releasing that and giving yourself permission and grace to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some things we can discuss that help. But I think, yeah, giving yourself permission, I think that's huge. And I love that you say it that way, because it is okay to set boundaries, and to remember that boundaries aren't necessarily just like because I don't feel safe, whether it's I don't feel safe emotionally or physically, but it's also like boundaries around my time, boundaries around my money, boundaries around, all kinds of things. It doesn't just have to be a physical or mental thing. We set boundaries around, oh, this is what I'm willing to do with my time. This is what I'm willing to do with my vacation leave. This is what I'm willing to do with my finances. We can set boundaries around all of those things, because sometimes we get our boundaries crossed in all of those areas. And knowing if someone else knows this is what works for me and my family, this is what I'm willing to do and not do, it makes it a lot clearer for everybody involved. And there's less room for miscommunication. So, how do we set boundaries with a dysfunctional family? So, boundaries in a healthy family can be difficult sometimes because we all have feelings and we have emotions. But in a dysfunctional family, it can be especially difficult. And so the article says once you see that a family member's guilt and anxiety is their own. So once we release ourselves, it's their guilt, it's their anxiety, it's their whatever, it's not mine. It is easier to separate yourself from their expectations and just do what feels right to you. So once you realize, like, I'm not responsible for their guilt or their anxiety or their depression or their fear or their whatever the case may be, it's theirs. I'm not in charge of that. Then we can free ourselves from expectation that is not ours to fulfill, and we can do what feels right for us. I love that sentence. I think if you get nothing else from this, take on that sentence and try and make it a part of who you are. Setting your own boundaries becomes easier when you recognize that everyone's boundaries can be different. And I think that's good too. Like, there is no certain mold that this is what my boundary has to look like or has to be. It can be what works for me, because we're all individual, we're all unique, and we all have different needs. And so our boundaries are all going to look a little bit different. And then I like this piece. You cannot pour from an empty cup. I think we know that. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast. Like, when we are depleted, there is nothing left to give. I have to take care of me, or there is no point. I have nothing left for my kids, for my spouse, for my friends, for my coworkers, for anyone. And so if you don't take steps to ensure your own physical and mental well-being, you cannot adequately take care of others, no matter how much pressure is being put on you to do so. So not only do you give yourself permission to set boundaries and take care of yourself, but if you don't do that, you can't take care of the people you love. You can't be there for them. And when you do say, okay, this is an event that I do want to be at, this is time I do want to spend with my family, this is a thing that does work for me, we have nothing to give. We'll be so empty, we'll be so stressed, we'll be so overwhelmed that we won't be able to have good moments together. We won't be able to have quality time with anyone. So now let's get to the heart of it. What does it look like to set boundaries? And we've talked about this a little bit, but in here they reference Brene Brown. And so if you know anything about this field, like, that's a big name. And Brene Brown is an expert on shame and vulnerability and all of those things. But she defines boundaries as simply our lists of what's okay and what's not okay. And I feel like that breaks it down a lot easier. Like, I can see the ladies kind of like, whoo, like a little bit of a light bulb moment. How does it feel to think of it that way? Simply our list of what's okay and what's not okay.
Well, I know Ashley's like, yeah, list, because she likes lists.
Yeah.
But like, just thinking about it, I think it makes it more simple. Like, it's just a list of things that are okay and then it's not okay in my life. And then I feel like if you're writing them down, it's going to be easier to communicate on that to whomever. And then it makes it more maybe attainable. I don't know, or achievable. It's like, it's a list, I can just check it.
Yeah. And I think it helps too to think, okay, I don't have to feel guilty about this, because it's simply, this is okay, this is acceptable, this is unacceptable. And it doesn't have to be personal, because the same things that are acceptable from one human in my life are going to be acceptable from another. And the things that are unacceptable are going to be pretty unacceptable across the board. And so it's just, it's tangible. It's like, I can see this now, I can touch it, it makes sense. And I think the word boundaries feels sometimes like, oh, that's so deep, that there's so much to that. It feels maybe even clinical to some people to think about the idea of boundaries. But a list of what's okay and what's not okay, we can do that.
I was gonna say as a list, it also thinking about like it could change, right,
Hmm.
with our seasons and our phases. And so, yes, it's those boundaries and they're permanent, but also thinking like they can be adjusted and it's
Hmm.
easier to do in a list form too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's flexible. It's almost like a living document. Like as we grow, as we change, as we build new relationships and learn ourselves better, it's going to adjust, it's going to adapt, and it's going to grow and change with us. And I like that because it should. And so, okay, these are some examples that they give us of what boundaries may look like within a family setting. So I love that they have examples because it really gets us thinking, and then it doesn't feel too personal. So, one thing they say is saying no to spending time with family members who make you uncomfortable. And that sounds super like, oh, duh, common sense. If someone makes me uncomfortable, I should not hang out with them. But I think there's a lot of pressure from people to be like, well, that's your family. That's family. And it's almost like we have taught ourselves that the word family means, well, we accept the unacceptable because that's family. They get a free pass. But it's okay to say, no, I'm not going to spend time with a family member who makes me uncomfortable. Another example they give is asking a substance abusing relative to not use around you or your children. That's pretty reasonable. In my list of what's okay and what's not okay, it's not okay to use around me and my kids. That's not something I consider safe and I consider all right. And I think that that's pretty reasonable to say, hey, I can't change you and control what you do on your time in your own space. But if we're going to be together, this is what I need from you, or I can't be together. Another example is asking to finish speaking without being interrupted. Sometimes in families, we don't feel like we're really listened to or really heard, or we feel like people are cutting us off before we're able to share our thoughts because maybe they don't agree with our thoughts, or maybe they're just in their own thoughts and want to get that out. But it's okay to say, hey, I would love to finish sharing my thoughts without being interrupted. And then we will go back and forth because that's a normal conversation. That's active listening. That's reasonable. So it can look like so many different things, but, and I've said this numerous times, to be effective, your boundaries must come with clear consequences. There must be a, I need this, or this is what's going to have to take place. So you have to let your family member know what the consequence will be if the boundary is crossed. So it can't just be like, you can't use your alcohol or drugs around me or my kids. Okay, well, what if I do? Are you just going to stay there and hang out and just be mad and sulk in the corner? Is that what the consequence is? You have to be clear. So, for example, if you drink at my party, I will ask you to leave. Pretty clear, pretty upfront, pretty easy to do. But also, you have to follow through. So you can't just say it and then be like, oh, if they cross your boundary, you have to follow through with what the consequence was. Or else it becomes like parenting a child and having idle threats, and then the kid knows, they're not really going to do that thing they said. So they're going to push the boundary. I mean, I think that's what we naturally do as humans. We're like, I'm going to push that boundary. I'm going to see how far I can go. I'm going to tiptoe on it and see if anybody says anything. So the only way we can let people know, like, this is true and this is serious and I'm going to follow through is to follow through. So you have to be clear. This is my boundary. This is the consequence of not honoring my boundary. And then I am going to follow through if and when that boundary is crossed. And I think that's the hardest part is the follow through, right?
It is because, like you said earlier, that a boundary is not mean, it's not
Mhm.
hateful, it's not any of those things. But when you set a boundary and then have to follow through with whatever the consequence is, it doesn't always go over well. And so then it can feel like it's mean. And you have to be very strong in knowing that this is okay, this is not okay. I've told this person that this is not okay. They knew it. They still made that choice. So I think you have to be really strong in your list of what is okay and what is not okay. Like you have to be confident that you feel that way.
And I think they know. I think someone can tell if you are wavering on your boundary, if you're unsure, or people can usually tell like, I'm about to not care about this boundary because this person's going to let me stomp on it. I think we have some awareness of that. But you can still hold true, even if you feel like I set up this boundary, I gave the consequence, and maybe I was nervous and maybe I didn't come across that I was super confident in it. But when they do cross that boundary, then we step up and we say, okay, that consequence I said, that's what we're going to have to do. And so I'm either going to ask you to leave or I'm going to have to leave or whatever else it was that I said was going to be done is going to have to be done so that I can show I truly mean what I say. And I think within families, again, we have to remember, we have to go back to the beginning of the article where we talked about remember your needs are your own, because we may be setting a boundary and explaining a consequence that other family members don't agree with. And that's totally fine. They don't have to, because their list of what's okay and not okay may not match what my list of what's okay and is not okay is. So they may not understand my boundary, but I don't have to understand someone's boundary to respect a boundary. And they don't have to either. Now, they may choose not to.
And I wonder, being from a small town, growing up in a small town, you talked about people envision, well, your family, so rules don't matter.
Mhm.
And I wonder if that is more in a smaller town because, if you have put a boundary to where you don't speak to a family member or something like that because it's an unhealthy relationship, but you're not interested in telling all the people around you what has happened. I feel like sometimes that doesn't translate well in a smaller town because family is family.
Mhm.
But maybe it's like that everywhere. So I'd be interested to know what that looks like in larger cities.
I think it probably does depend a little bit on the community that you live in, and how enmeshed people are. I think in smaller communities, people tend to know this person and that person, or there's some kind of connection. Like you're always just, even if you don't know them personally, oh, but I know so and so, or they go to this church, or they work here, or I see them at the grocery store. There's some kind of connection. And then social media, I think within smaller communities, people see all the people's stuff, like they're like people's vacations are out there, and sometimes their quarrels with their families are out there, and sometimes there's just a lot of information that's being shared, and so there can be more judgment. And it can be really easy for us to say, I don't understand why that person has set that boundary with this family member because they're so nice and they're so sweet and they're so kind, but I don't know them behind closed doors. And seeing someone just out in public and being an acquaintance with someone is not the same as knowing how that person interacts with people whom they're in a closer relationship with. I don't know what people have gone through. I don't know what their relationships have looked like. I don't know what hurts have been there. We don't know. And so I think it's very risky to start judging people's relationships with their family members and the boundaries that have been set, or the actions that have been taken to protect individuals, because we just don't know. And anybody can portray anything for a few minutes in public or for a lifetime on social media, because you get a highlight reel, you get the picture they want to paint for you. And so I think we have to be really aware we don't know. And it's not mine to know, and it's not mine to judge, because my needs are my own and their needs are their own. And I just have to accept and respect that this is what this person needs. And so I'm not going to ask questions. If they want me to know what's going on, they'll share it with me. And if not, it's not my business. But I do think people do want to judge that. They want to say, well, that's your daddy, that's your mama, that's your sister, that's your whoever. You shouldn't be treating them like that. But we just don't know. We just don't have the bigger picture. And so until you get the bigger picture, which you may not get because it's not yours to get, we just have to say, you know what, it's not my business. I have enough to worry about on my own. I have enough to worry about with myself and with my family, and I'm not gonna go there. I'm gonna let that be. So all of this is a lot, and we see it and we talk about it and we know it's important, but this last section of the article, and I think the probably the part we've been waiting for, is some of those tips on ways to create boundaries with dysfunctional family. And so there are a few things that we can actually do, some actions we can take to help us to begin this process and to go through it. And so the very first one I really like, and I think it's really important. And I think it's one of those that it's like, I need to give myself permission. And I think it's important for people to give themselves permission. And that's sometimes we have to take a break. Sometimes we have to take a break. And it goes on to say, spending time away from certain family members can help you identify where your stress is coming from and what you need to adjust in that relationship going forward. Sometimes we have to have a timeout. Sometimes we just need a break. And it may be, okay, this is my break to figure out what the boundary needs to look like and how I can better outline what's okay and what's not okay for me. And sometimes it's a realization that there are some people that cannot be in our inner circle because they just aren't going to be healthy for us. And the realization that I can care about somebody, but have to keep them at a distance because it's just not going to be a good situation for my well-being. So taking a break may be the first step. And I like that they say, because then you can identify where your stress is coming from. Is it the person? Is it certain situations with that person? Is it a bigger family gathering that stresses you out? Is it certain people that interact with one another and it's not just one person, it's the interaction between the two that makes you feel uncomfortable or doesn't feel okay? It gives us space to find awareness and figure out what that looks like and how I can move forward. So taking a break may be your first step. It may be what you need to kind of reset. Another one is write it out. And I always like the idea of writing it out because we usually spin our wheels and we let things rent space in our head and we play it over and over and this way and that way, but it consumes us and we really get nowhere with it. So sometimes just writing it out can be really important. And it mentions in this article, and I've always mentioned, journaling can be really helpful. It's a good way for us to process our emotions and get it out of our head. And it tends to lose a little bit of its power over us when we stop letting it spin, when we give it somewhere to be. So writing it down can be really important. And they say in this article, if you have to interact with a family member who causes you stress, it may help to write a letter saying everything that you want to say to them. The key is you don't have to send this letter. You might decide this is how I need to communicate because I get too nervous to communicate in person or verbally over the phone or however it may be. So maybe it is a letter that gets sent, but maybe it's just me needing to get it out of me needing to process it and just start beginning healing, because just writing things down is very cathartic. And it can be very good for us. It can also just be what helps us plan what we want to say if we need to have a conversation with them. So it may just be the stepping stone of let me outline my thoughts before I go into the conversation so I feel more prepared.
I love the write it out, and I have done that. Like written out what I would say because I think about those things anyway, but I have written out what I would say. I've never sent a letter or anything like that, but just when dealing with certain situations, like I have written out what was bothering me and really trying to use the I messages rather than you did this and you did this and you did this,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that's not helpful. but that helped me just kind of process my feelings and be able to move past some of the hurt and just be like, okay, so I know what has happened. I know what would need to be talked about. If there was ever an opportunity, then here we go. So I really like that one. That's, and I guess it comes as no surprise that I like that one. I'm the list maker, but yeah, I think it's really helpful to get those emotions out, even if you just then tear them up
Yeah.
and rip it up and throw it away. You've still gotten it out.
hmm I think that can be very therapeutic too. Just getting it out and then destroying it can just kind of give you a sense of relief in and of itself as well. The next one is kind of like a twist on the writing it out, but instead it is role playing, which most people feel a little weird about. They're like, oh, that's awkward. But if you're especially anxious about having a conversation with someone to explain your boundaries and what that looks like, it may be helpful to find a friend, someone close and trusted to you, to say, hey, let me practice this. I need to practice saying this. Maybe you give me some feedback so I can prepare, because there's so many emotions. Typically, if we're at the place where we're, especially with a dysfunctional family member, we're at the place where we're like, I have to set a boundary. This is almost a life or death feeling moment. This needs to happen. Our emotions can be very high. And especially with family members, we can have a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and maybe even some guilt, even if it's not warranted guilt. I think sometimes we put that on ourselves anyways. It can be helpful to practice. Kind of like when you were in school and you had to give a speech. Practicing eliminated some of the fear and some of the anxiety, because at least you had an idea of what you were going to say. So it can reduce our stress and our discomfort once it's time for the real thing, because we've given it a go, and we can get feedback from that friend or that person that allows us to role play with them, because they can say, oh, that felt a little accusatory, that felt a little direct or mean spirited, because we may not mean to do that, but again, emotions. And so we can adjust. It gives us an opportunity to adjust just a little bit and to be prepared and to be less overwhelmed. So role playing is another option and another thing that can help us be ready for that moment. The next one they talk about is one that Ashley just mentioned a second ago, and it's really important anytime we're communicating with anyone about anything, for the most part, is using I statements. When we get emotional, it can be very easy to slip into you statements and blaming and anger and name calling, or just a lot. It's our human nature, because we're defending ourselves, and so it's all about let me attack. But that doesn't do us any good, because when I attack, all that someone wants to do is attack back at me, and so we make no forward movement. No ground is gained, just more hurt and more regret. So when we use I statements, we're focusing on me. I'm focusing on how I feel. And no one can tell us how we feel is wrong, because feelings aren't right or wrong. They just are. They are just our experience in the moment. They're also not fact. They're just feeling, but they can't be disputed because they are just my experience. So an example that they give here of an I statement is, I feel self-conscious when you make comments about my physical appearance. They cannot argue with that. They cannot tell you you are wrong. They can't tell you that, but it can get across. This is a good way to start a boundary around people talking about our appearance. Is I can say, I feel self-conscious when you make comments about my physical appearance. I'm asking that you no longer do that. If you do, I will need to leave the conversation. It's pretty clear. It's easily done. It's reasonable. And I think it matches up with our list of things that are okay or not okay. It's not okay for you to criticize my appearance. If you do, I'm going to take myself away from that, because it's not good for me. It's not healthy for me. And even if I don't believe it, it may get in my head and cause me to have thoughts that I don't need to have. So I'm not going to allow it in my life. But that I statement, there's no argument there. I'm not being mean to you. I'm not saying you are so awful. You always do this. Maybe it's true, but that they're just gonna be mad and they're gonna come back at you. So using those I statements when we're setting boundaries can help lower the chances of it just becoming a two-sided attack. I'm going to try really hard to not attack, and then hopefully they will not attack back. Now, they may still attack you because people feel what they feel and they hear what they want to hear. But we can know that on my side of the street, I did what I was supposed to do in the best way that I could. The next thing that they say is to share with others who understand. And so sometimes it's really important to just kind of process through this with people that have been there, people who have experienced this, people who have had to set boundaries with family members that maybe were dysfunctional or who made them feel a certain kind of way, or who were just tap dancing all over their list of things that are not okay. And so talking it through is helpful. Building that support network is helpful because it's hard, especially when you're first getting started. One of the examples they give is if you're trying to set boundaries with someone who may have a substance abuse problem, going to a group like Al-Anon, where there are family members who are trying to do the same kind of thing and set the same kind of boundaries, can be really helpful because we can learn from their experience. So sharing with others who understand is another way that can really help us with those boundaries. And then the last thing that they mention, and I highly recommend, is if this is a really toxic relationship and you feel really intertwined and enmeshed, and it feels especially difficult for you to be able to speak up and protect yourself and set the boundaries, you may want to seek professional help. That's what professionals are there for. It can be really hard to set these boundaries with family, particularly family members that the greater community says you have to respect this person no matter what. That can be hard because you think, okay, if I set this boundary, or if I take a break, or if I set this consequence, then I'm going to be frowned upon by everyone because how dare you do that to that person. Talking to a professional, they can help you talk through this and help you remember the reason behind setting the boundary, and remember that I am responsible for my own needs. I'm responsible for taking care of my emotions and my wellness. So you can talk to a family or an individual counselor. Professional therapists can help you identify dysfunctional family patterns that you may not even see yet, because it's so normalized to you that you don't see it as a dysfunctional pattern. So they can help you identify if there is dysfunction, where it is, and how to begin making changes so that that doesn't have to keep going from generation to generation. So sometimes we need outsiders' help. Sometimes we need a professional's help, and that can be a really good place to go and seek guidance. Now, in the article, they say this, and I'm going to too. If you think your family relationships are impacting your mental health, there is a mental health test online at the mentalhealthamerica.org site where you can learn more about how to manage your mental health and how to reach out for help and guidance. So I hope that these suggestions are helpful. I hope that there's been some clarity in what a boundary is and isn't, what it looks like, what its purpose is, and some things we can do to prepare ourselves to be able to set boundaries with family and dysfunctional relationships within our lives. I think it's a really great resource, and I encourage you to dig deeper for yourself into very research-based materials like Mental Health America, and then reaching out to professionals if you feel like you have a more specific need that you need to discuss further. This is this episode of Life Simplified. Join us next week for our last Mental Health Awareness Month episode.
Thanks for listening to Life Simplified. We are family and consumer sciences agents with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. Contact us at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.